Welcome to the Crazy Wisdom Podcast. I've got Rob Meyerson here, and he is the co-founder and CEO of Interlune. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Stewart. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yep. Very excited to dig into space. How can you dig into space? No, you guys are going to dig into the moon with robots and all sorts of other stuff. Can you tell our listeners a little bit more about what Interlune is and what you guys are working on?
Sure. Yeah, I like how you did that, Stewart. And we are, Interlune is a Seattle-based company. We are commercializing natural resources from space and starting with helium-3 from the moon. Helium-3 is a stable isotope of helium with 2 protons and 1 neutron, and it is extremely rare on Earth and plentiful on the moon. It's been because it's been implanted there for 4 billion years.
Wow. And I was just reading about cosmic rays. It's like because of solar radiation and our magnetic sphere sort of stops it from coming into the Earth, but out there on the moon, it just gets hit with a bunch of rays. Like how do the rays end up inside of the regolith, the soil?
Yeah, that's a question for our science team, but I'm going to do my best. So the helium-3 and the other elements of the solar wind, there's hydrogen, there's helium, there's other gases. They travel through space, and that magnetosphere around Earth prevents them from implanting the Earth. But the moon doesn't have a magnetosphere, so that solar wind implantation is being done continuously. When there's higher solar activity, there's a little bit more of that solar wind and a little bit more of that helium-3. And over geologic timescales, as the moon is battered with meteorites and impacts, that lunar regolith, or that dusty surface, is stirred up. And so that helium-3 is distributed down below the topmost layer where it's implanted. And we know from the Apollo missions that at least down to 3 meters, there's helium-3.
Very cool. And I was just reading about that essentially the Apollo missions, they got some regolith, they got the moon rocks, they brought them back, and that's how they found out that there's helium-3 up there. At that time, did they know? What were, because the other sort of places where helium-3 is used is inside of nuclear reactors, inside of MRIs, inside of potentially fusion reactors. Were the implications of helium-3 known when the Apollo mission came, or was that something they figured out later?
It's pretty limited. There's an Australian scientist who basically found helium-3 decades before the Apollo program.
Cool.
And it's a great point, Stewart, because we didn't go to the moon for helium-3. We went to the moon to explore and do science and do all the other things. But our co-founder Harrison Schmitt, who is the only geologist to walk on the moon, flew on Apollo 17, and wow. He's the executive chairman of Interlune. And he personally, investigated and analyzed those samples.
Wow.
Many of those samples. He personally trained the Apollo astronauts, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin and all the others, in field geology. So telling them what to look for. And he refers to a sample on Apollo 11 where Neil Armstrong sort of took a look at the rock box and said, that looks empty, and he scooped up more regolith. And that resulted in one of the first samples where they measured helium-3.
So it's sort of like accidental, based on this guy told them that they should go do this, and then he picked up some rocks, and then because of the way that he picked up the rocks, he essentially got us the knowledge that there's something useful up there.
What he took was some bulk regolith, some loose, sandy regolith rather than rocks, and that loose regolith is what was the first indications. And if I can follow on to my earlier point, we didn't go to the moon for helium-3, but we did find it. The sites that were selected for the Apollo landings are not the highest concentrations of helium-3. Mm-hmm. So you'll see reports on 2 parts per billion or 6 parts per billion. We have learned a lot since the Apollo program about where the helium-3 might be, and Interlune has identified sites where there's higher concentration, and we intend to go there in the next few years, prospect and validate, and and then we'll go deploy robots to extract it.
Very cool. And so the prospecting, how much can we do here? I've heard that we use a lot of spectrometry. I don't really know what spectrometry is, and not specifically on helium-3 or the moon, but in order to do all of space. I think the context I heard it on was that they try to measure bodies that go around solar systems, and they use spectrometry in some sort of way to measure the position of things that we can't actually see because the sun or the stars, the distant stars, block that. From Earth, it's been a while since we've been back from the moon. What can we tell from here about what's up there?
So from Earth, we've deployed a satellite called the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, LRO, which has been orbiting the moon for more than a decade. It has sensors on board that measure the age of the regolith. They also measure the quantities of ilmenite, which is a titanium-rich element on the moon. And ilmenite is structured in a way that it captures a higher percentage of that solar wind than other regolith. So we've concluded that high concentrations of ilmenite combined with older regolith, undisturbed, aged regolith, are areas that have high probability of having high concentrations of helium-3. And we use those sensors, but we also plan to deploy our own mass spectrometer. And I'm looking at one, right in front of me right now in our lab. We use these every day, and what we'll do is we'll mechanically process the lunar soil, and solar wind gases will off-gas from it, and we'll use the mass spectrometer to measure how much helium-3, how much helium, how much hydrogen, and the concentration of the other gases.
Okay, there's a lot of questions I have from that. I want to understand what a mass spectrometer is, but then you said helium-3, normal helium, and hydrogen, and it got me some questions about, because helium itself seems, I think, is a rare element as well, or gas or whatever. What is a mass spectrometer? What does it do?
So I'm not a planetary scientist, but a mass spectrometer is a sensor that can measure gas constituencies or material constituencies in a fluid. So if we want to determine if there is, when I was at Blue Origin before Interlune, we were looking at using a mass spectrometer to measure material in a rocket plume and determine if there was metal in there, and that might mean that the rocket plume is, the engine's burning itself up. In this case, we're using it to measure the gas constituents that are in the off gas from the lunar regolith.
And then you've got the gas basically, and then you capture the gas in that off gassing, and then you bring it back through rockets. Is that right?
That's right. We'll bring it back with a rocket and a capsule that'll come back through Earth's atmosphere and bring this valuable product back to Earth. So what we want to do on the moon is we want to separate the helium-3 as much as reasonably possible so that we're only bringing the valuable stuff back, because helium is rare on Earth, but it's still not expensive enough to warrant going to space to go get it. Same thing with hydrogen. So hydrogen's not rare on Earth. Helium-3 sells for $20 million a kilogram. So we can afford to buy a rocket, put a lander on the moon, process this helium-3 and bring it back and still make money. And that is the whole idea behind Interlune. And it's our starting point. Once we establish that head start and we have infrastructure on the moon making money by selling helium-3 on Earth, then we can start to make rocket propellant, liquid oxygen, liquid hydrogen. We can make metals. We can process rare earth elements to support industrialization on the moon or industrialization in the Earth orbits between the Earth and the moon.
That's so cool. And this is the whole thing, is that it's a business, and I like it because business gives us a sort of grounded sense of like, we actually have to do something. We have to make it valuable for somebody. And I like the fact that it's like far out, literally on the moon, a business on the moon. because we're getting
Yeah.
into sort of the promise of the 1960s, which we've been lagging on, but it feels like it's coming back, and it feels like it's coming back really quickly. And I'm really excited about it. And there's also this sort of nation state competition that we could get into as well that seems to be motivating part of it, which motivated our first time up there as well. Um, so propellant, processing rare earth materials. What are you most excited about? So bringing back a helium-3 works as a business. What are you most excited about that it unlocks right after that?
Um, well, after the helium-3 business, I am most excited about creating an in-space economy that me and my peers have dreamed about for decades. Like the idea that there is a space for space economy where products and services are transacted in space. That is long term what we want to build at Interlune. Today, what gets me most excited is serving customers. This week, you might have heard we announced a commercial contract with Blue Force, the Finland-based market
Whoa,
leader in cryogenic dilution refrigeration. We announced a multi-$100 million contract to sell helium-3 starting in 2028, and we are, laser focused on meeting our commitments and serving that customer.
very cool. Okay, so 2028, you've got a customer, and this is the crazy thing about the business that you're in is that it's people talk about long sales cycles, but this is billions of dollars for 1 kilogram. No, $20 million for 1 kilogram. So like huge amount of money for something that weighs 2.2 pounds. And like these guys, well, where are they? How does it work right now? How does terrestrial helium-3 work? And what's their business model? Like, must be a really interesting sort of avenue of discussion for that, right?
Yeah. There's very trace amounts of helium-3 in our terrestrial helium.
Mm.
So from the beginnings of the Earth, the primordial sources of
What?
helium-3, um, uh, and the most of the helium-3 we use today comes from the decay of tritium. So there is um, a set of nuclear reactors that make tritium as a byproduct. Tritium has a 12.3-year half-life. So it decays to helium-3 and helium-3 stable. So unless you let it leak out or, it's going to be there for a long time. And we've been using it for decades. Tritium is also used in our nuclear weapons supply. So decades ago, we had a lot of nuclear weapons, and then the START treaties were signed, and we have fewer nuclear weapons now. But that tritium
Mm.
used in the nuclear weapons is being decays to helium-3, and in the maintenance of that stockpile, we replace the tritium. The Department of Energy isotope program manages the helium-3 stockpile in the U.S. And one of our first contracts we announced in May is with the Department of Energy isotope program. So in addition to distributing, selling the helium-3 they have from the stockpile, they're planning to buy helium-3 from Interlune. And that's a great signal that the U.S. government and the commercial markets believe that the criticality of this precious rare resource needs to be addressed, sooner rather than later.
Did I get it right that essentially we have nuclear weapons? We're not doing as many nuclear weapons as much. That the uranium or something has a half life that converts. No, the tritium has a half life, and so we have a constant set of helium-3. But now, because we no longer make nuclear weapons, it's going away, and so that source of it is going away. And I bet that supply chain was really expensive to run. Nobody's going out and creating tritium. Is it the only use of that is for nuclear weapons?
No, actually, there's fusion energy.
Okay.
Most of the fusion energy companies in the world are planning to use tritium and deuterium
Okay.
as their fusion fuel, and they plan to use some of the tritium from the stockpile to start their reactor, but then they will breed tritium using lithium-6, and they'll
Mm.
breed tritium in the reactor and they'll burn it in real time. So that tritium won't have enough time to decay to helium-3, all but a small part of it, because since tritium is unstable, you really don't want to keep it around because it's, every time you look at it, it's turning into helium-3. So,
What?
so but fusion energy is looking to be the biggest user of tritium here in the coming, 5 to 20 years. After that, once deuterium tritium fusion is out there and it's commercialized, we see deuterium and helium-3 as a potential upgrade and improvement in fusion energy source in the future. There's a couple of companies out there that are pursuing helium-3 fusion now, but it's far from the leader is far and away deuterium and tritium.
Mm. And how does quantum computing fit into this?
So quantum computing fits in much sooner than the fusion case. To make a superconducting quantum computer work, we need to chill that chip down to millikelvin temperature. So we're talking colder than any place in the universe, near absolute zero. And the only way to get there is using helium-3 and helium-4 dilution refrigerators. And this is a device that made by companies like Blue Pores and others that if you've seen a picture of a quantum computer, many of the pictures look like a copper chandelier. And what you're looking at is actually the dilution refrigerator, the inside.
Cool.
The quantum chip looks like a chip. And so these dilution refrigerators are what make the superconducting quantum chip cold. And they need to be cold because they need to minimize the errors so that they can isolate the quantum operations. And so helium-3 is essential for those dilution refrigerators operations. Today, a dilution refrigerator uses between 20 and 50 liters of helium-3. There's about 7,400 liters of helium-3 in a kilogram. So we tend to talk in kilograms because we're looking at growing the supply chain so that it's measured in kilograms in the future.
Okay, so there's a really interesting point about that. There's the thing that I associate with quantum computers is actually the refrigerator that is keeping that thing cold. The errors sound really interesting of like what is the relationship between coldness and quantum errors and like with the electrons and the superposition and stuff. So that's interesting. Okay, so let's go back to the cryogenic, and I imagine the cryogenic stuff. I believe you said the Finnish company is a cryogenic company. So it's keeping it really cold. There's the popular science understanding of cryogenics for after people die, kind of saving their bodies in the hope of in the future getting resurrected and such. What are the other sort of cryogenic use cases in the world that maybe are less sci-fi and more practical?
Yeah, well, going back to my career beginnings in rockets, liquid oxygen at minus 293 degrees Fahrenheit and liquid hydrogen at minus 423 degrees Fahrenheit are cryogenic fuels that produce the highest efficiency rocket propulsion. I've got experience building teams that design cryogenic systems. To make a rocket work, you not only have to combust those fuels together in the thrust chamber, in the combustion chamber, but you have to store those fuels in rocket tanks, so designing structures that can hold materials that are that cold. Here at Interlune, we're building cryogenic separation technology because once we get to the moon and we've extracted this solar wind gas, it has a combination of helium-3 and helium and hydrogen and other gases. And we want to chill that down to 1 Kelvin or so that we can separate the helium-3 out. So we're distilling. It's an enrichment process. And we've demonstrated that here in our facility in Seattle regularly this year. And we're doing some groundbreaking work in separating that trace amount of helium from helium-3 from that terrestrial helium gas. And so it's exciting for us. We have a team of cryogenics engineers here at Interlune working on our applications and our needs.
Yeah, that's really cool because you have to essentially, and I think I saw some videos or photos of this as well, is that you have the machine, the excavator, and the excavator needs to go get the dust, and so you need to practice that here on Earth so that you can know that you're going to go up there and then it'll work up there. But at the same time, you also need to practice actually separating the helium-3 from the helium, turning it into a gas, and that requires the cryogenic part, right?
That's exactly right. And on the excavation part, like we need to. I mentioned earlier the helium-3 in the regolith is measured in parts per billion. So we recognized early on we Interlune needs to be great at high volume continuous excavation. And
Mm.
so what we did is we looked at the market and we partnered with Vermeer Corporation out of Pella, Iowa. And Vermeer makes industrial agriculture and mining equipment. They make excavators, trenchers, and so we partnered with them, and we bring the space expertise and the knowledge of the lunar environment,
Yeah,
and they
interesting.
bring the ability to innovate and create these big machines. We try to do that across our product, our technology stack, but Vermeer is the first partner that we've identified. Um, on the other part, just like demonstrating on Earth that we can extract this solar wind implanted gas. First off is the regolith samples, and I'm sitting in our regolith lab here in Seattle. Um, the regolith the simulants that we make here on Earth to prepare us for operating on the moon are really simulating the size distribution of particles in different locations on the moon. But what they don't simulate is the solar wind implantation.
Mm.
So you could go and heat up this regolith simulant and nothing would come out. Um, Maybe a little bit of water, or probably not water because it's pretty dry by design. We got a grant from the state of Texas to go develop a lunar regolith simulant development center.
Mm.
We've just hired our first couple of employees down there, and we're going to make solar wind implanted regolith simulant. And we need it, and we know other people will need it as well. So that is a part of our development process, and how we think about this, Stuart, is we need to do. It's expensive to go to the moon,
Mm.
so we need to do everything we can on Earth to get ourselves ready. Working with a world-class company like Vermeer helps us. Building our own novel regolith simulants helps us, and we're doing all the other things in testing to help us along that path.
So the simulation in Texas, that sounds really interesting. How do you simulate what is it that you called the solar wind? How do you simulate solar wind?
We have to create our own version of the solar wind. So it's ion implantation. We create that field. We inject the simulant into it, and you
Uh,
have either hydrogen or helium gas or combinations. And so that's what we're doing. We're experimenting with it right now. We've worked with researchers at NASA that have prototyped the process, and we're continuing to work through it.
that's really interesting. Okay, and so interesting point. I follow another company. I've had Matt Gialik, hopefully pronounce his name on the show from Astroforge, and I've been so interested in his posts because he's very transparent. And he's just like they sent out a satellite and it didn't work, and he like did the full thing, and it's so crazy because it's like going back for the last 15 years. It's kind of been really weird to follow Silicon Valley because yes, they have been able to do some cool stuff with AI, but for the last like 15 to 20 years, it's all just been basically apps, and like apps, while interesting and useful, are not like going to space. So here we are, we're able to like, we're at the, it's now like in the whole time, the space has been slowly going up and up and up. And I saw this um, great documentary. I forget what it's called, but it's all about the how Rocket Lab came out of nowhere, and such a great story with the guy from New Zealand who was just like screwing around with rockets and started and then had an investor gave him 50% of the company and for not much money, and then but then it ended up it worked out. He's got such a great quote, and I won't try to butcher it, but if the listeners are interested in that quote, DM me and I will find it because I think I wrote it down somewhere. But about how startups, and just like somebody asked him one of those questions that they asked startup people, just like come on, man, I have no answer for that question because we're dealing with such insane pressure to do rockets. And now you've done rockets before. You've actually done a lot of rockets. Can you talk more about your history with Blue Origin and everything like and before like it's been a while, right? You've been working on rockets for a while.
I'm proud to say, not sorry to say, that I've been in the industry for 40 years.
Mm.
I started out at NASA Johnson Space Center in the late 80s. I was an aerodynamicist by training, so I worked on the space shuttle, defining like how the space shuttle maneuvers through the atmosphere to come back to Earth and land. Not many people know that the astronauts manually they stick landed the shuttle. They didn't use automatic landing, and so I got to work with the astronauts throughout that process and share with them how the aerodynamics were derived so that they're more comfortable operating the system. I also took on roles at NASA working on parachute systems, because we were transitioning from we were adding a drag parachute to the space shuttle, and then we were
Mm.
transitioning to newer vehicles that would use parachutes, much like the Apollo capsule did. I moved to the Pacific Northwest in the late 90s, went to work for Kistler Aerospace, which was a startup working on a two-stage reusable launch vehicle, a lot like Starship, but smaller. And then I found Blue Origin in 2003. I had a friend who was working there. I got connected with the team. I interviewed with Jeff Bezos and ended up going to work there, working for Jeff Bezos for 15 years. Led the team from 10 people to 1,500 when I left in
Wow.
2018. Um, I, uh, I learned a lot through the career. I moved from primarily a technical engineer working aerodynamics and flight test to technical project management to leading a company, hiring, and got to see it all. And that's it's been a great career, and it's what really led to starting Interlune. It's because I believe that the infrastructure that we'll need to get to space and go to the moon is being developed by others, and now it's time to focus on the applications that are going to build an in-space economy.
Mm. So I would love to understand because they commonly talk about startups being like rocket ships and get on the rocket ship. You led the team from 10 people to 1,500 people. And so you actually experienced scale. One of the most interesting things that I experienced joining a hyper growth company was the difference between 150 employees and 500 employees. You got to sort of 1,500 team members. What is it? What is the like to diverge very randomly from space? Well, maybe not. There's a connection I can make to that. But what have you learned from knowledge management from going from 10 people to 1,500? How do you manage knowledge inside an organization of 1,500 people?
Well, let's, Blue Origin's a little bit different in
Yeah.
that um, the hyper growth happened over 14, 15 years. Like we were 200 people in 2012. I started in 2003. So we had 9 years of very, very slow growth. And that's driven by the owner. We're funded by one person. Um, Managing knowledge. I mean, we had a lot of tools internally for doing that. But in those early days, it's a lot of documents. It was very important to us that we not only wrote documents that documented the requirements and the test data and things that we knew we needed, but also the design decisions that we made.
Mm.
Because um, it's interesting in space or in a deep tech company. Um, you have so many different types of skill sets that you need to get something done.
Yeah.
So you need a rocket engine, you need the tanks, you need the avionics and software, you need the ground systems, you need a regulatory person. So
Whoa.
let's say you can do a lot in a tech company, a software company with um, a couple dozen people. If you're going to buy a lot of things, you can do a lot with small numbers of people in space, but really you find very quickly that you want to start to vertically integrate, and the size of the company grows very, very quickly. managing all that growth, all that knowledge. Key is you need to keep your people.
Mm.
You can't
Mm.
just have people coming and going. You need to keep them there, mentoring the incoming, the next people up, and also just making sure you find a way to document those decisions. Why did we pick, you know, um, liquid hydrogen versus kerosene for our fuel?
Hmm.
At Interlune, why are we going after helium-3 versus water or making landing pads?
Mm.
Those decisions, are thought out, and as the team grows, you need to make sure that like you're able to clearly and quickly explain to people why we're going this direction and keep the team moving in that direction rather than have them second guess everything that you did, 6 months or a year or 2 years before that.
Okay, I want to, because you mentioned some interesting things about what I imagine are the other potential businesses on the moon. And I heard this in the video I was watching before about water. Is like, is there enough water on the moon? Like, why did you mention water? What's the relationship there?
Well, that has been the focus of NASA and the Artemis program is to
Mm.
go mine water ice on the moon and the South Pole. We've learned since in the last decade from missions that went and uh, basically sent a spacecraft penetrator into the moon and measured the dust plume that came up. We were able to confirm that there are water ice deposits in the south pole of the moon. So the Artemis program is focused on getting to the South Pole, harvesting that water ice and turning it into oxygen and hydrogen. Um, that's you
Mm.
know that's really great. That's a very very extreme environment. Those water ice deposits are in permanently shadowed craters, so um, you're operating in a very cold area. For Interlune, we've decided the helium-3 is mostly near the equatorial
Uh,
locations on the moon, so we're going to be going to sites that are near, but nowhere close to the Apollo landing sites.
Interesting. Okay, so many things I just learned about the moon. But what does the water open up for? Like, why are people looking at that?
Well, so launching something off Earth is hard. It's very
Mm.
very expensive to get a kilogram of payload into space, anywhere from $3,000 to $6,000 a kilogram. So if you're launching propellant, it's really makes your mission much more expensive. So any material that you can source from space, rocket propellant, water, metals. When you can start building things in space using 3D printing, um, all of those things are going to lower the cost by an order of magnitude of your overall space mission. So why build a satellite on Earth and launch it to space when you can build it in space using resources that you've sourced on the moon or from an asteroid? That's the future we're working toward,
Mm.
and we're not there yet, but we're working toward that.
So yeah, the water is actually key for actually making the propellant work to get everything back because and in Interlune's case as well, I imagine that in the rockets that are sending back the helium-3 that you'll want to at some point actually manufacture that propellant there. Is that part of the plan as well?
Yeah, that's exactly right. That would be part of our long-term roadmap.
Yeah.
And since we started the company, we're excited to see NASA pick not one but two large landers, the human lander system options that are systems that are designed to ultimately be reusable. One uses liquid oxygen and liquid methane. The other one uses liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen. And so it's I don't think that is was a random thing. I think NASA was thinking they had some forward-looking companies that competed for the work, and NASA was looking forward to that. Today,
Mm.
they're thinking they'll launch, starships to refuel a starship in orbit,
Mm.
but a decade or more from now, I believe will source that fuel in orbit, in space,
Mm.
and you'll get rid of all those launches.
Oh, interesting. Um, so so if you can mine the water on on the moon as well, then you cut out a lot of the propellant. But there's more things that you would have to get up there as well, right? It's just getting cutting off one part of it. Is that correct?
Um, well, ultimately, the lunar regolith includes rare
Oh,
earth elements, water, silicon, aluminum, iron, titanium. So in addition to the solar wind implantation, the helium and helium-3, nitrogen, um, there is a lot of things that can be processed on the moon. It just takes energy. Uh,
mm,
so we're going to start with solar, but we're watching very excitedly and closely the NASA's decision to pursue fission surface power on the moon, nuclear
cool.
power, and that that allows you to operate not just when the
Mm,
solar cells work, but during the day and night, and that really just increases your yield, and it makes for a much more profitable end state.
Okay, that's really interesting. So there's because we have solar power on the moon, and let me see if I got my astronomy right. There's the moon goes around the Earth, and there's a bunch of times where it doesn't have solar energy. But then, so if you have nuclear power, then it's the same thing on Earth, where you have a stable base load for nuclear, and then you can do whatever you need with solar. It's almost like a really good test case for kind of the Earth as well. I'm going back to knowledge management, sharing knowledge from Earth to Moon sounds pretty interesting. We could talk about the lag too, because I think there's an 8 minute lag to Mars, and there is a lag to space or to the Moon as well. But we're not talking about humans going to the Moon for a while, right? Like, when do you think humans will actually have a reason to go to the moon?
So the NASA's Artemis program is all about getting astronauts
Okay.
back to
That.
the moon this decade, going to the South Pole. The
Mm-hmm.
Artemis system, the
Mm.
whole architecture is designed for that. For Interlune, we're going with robots. We have our harvester vehicles are the size of a car, an electric car. They'll excavate, they'll sort, they'll extract and separate the helium-3, and then we'll use a separate rocket to bring it back to Earth. Uh, as the demand for helium-3 grows, we can scale up to 10 and 20 and 50 of these robots or go to larger machines.
Mm.
Um, and that's our plan going forward. We'll be, monitored and maintained via a team of people on the ground in a mission control, and we'll have robotic maintenance on those systems.
Really cool, and that is funny because it's like just going back to the night, and we could it last like 20 minutes or so. We could kind of have a conversation about history as well, because so many people in the technology world are like, "What happened in 1970s? Why did it all stop?" But then in the 1970s, that's where AI comes in, and AI sounds pretty important for what you just talked about, because now we have self-driving cars. That seems like it's going to be directly related to the vehicles that you guys are running. Are there any other interesting AI things that I should pay attention to, just because I'm really interested in the software angles of AI? Like, what are the other things that are opening up in terms of your mission based on this very interesting rise of not necessarily just large language models, but computer vision and other machine learning applications? Anything interesting there?
Yeah, we get going back to your earlier question about knowledge management. The
Yeah.
AI is going to be
Yeah.
great for that because we're producing a lot of data, both imagery and
Mm.
just touching hundreds of tons of soil, millions of tons of soil over a long period of time, lunar soil. Um, we're also using it from a science aspect. So the using AI to process imagery for not real time, but post application to figure out where the helium-3 and other resources are, help us build better models of the reserves on the moon. And then you bring up a good point about real time imagery. The lighting and the landscape on the moon is really, really difficult to navigate. So we'll be looking to, some of the most advanced um, autonomy and sensing approaches
Oh.
for what we're doing.
Because this just gave me a good question because the self-driving cars are driving at night, so they don't need light. Well, no, they probably they have headlights and stuff like that.
They,
Yeah.
yeah, depending on the brand, they're using combination of LiDAR, radar, and cameras. We have one of the people on our team worked at Cruise Automation,
Uh,
ran worked on their cameras. So we have, a combination of expertise in the engineering disciplines and the science disciplines here to get us started, and we'll grow the team over time.
is that right that they don't that if it's the right combination, they don't actually need light and they can go off on the dark when it's dark on the moon and they can kind of run around?
Um, when it's dark, you don't have the solar power, so we're going to be dependent on having a way to either operate or survive the really extremely cold lunar night, and that is
Oh,
we plan to hibernate right now,
yeah.
and then fire the systems back up during the next lunar day.
Because the batteries, you don't want to ship up batteries up there. It's too expensive to
Well,
ship batteries. Yeah, yeah.
that's heavyweight, but also just the extreme cold during the lunar night is going to be
Oh,
really, really hard to operate.
extreme cold of lunar night. That sounds really interesting. Um, and that doesn't help with the cryogenic stuff because the cryogenic stuff probably needs to get colder than that, right?
Well, that's a good point. It does need to get colder than that, but it does make sense for us to do some of this cryogenic separation work during the lunar night and take advantage of that colder base temperature. Um, that's something that we're thinking about and shifting our thinking about our design.
Hmm. Going back to the knowledge management question about science in general, it sounds like you've not only been around a lot of scientists who are doing sort of empirical work, but also business and engineers. What have you learned about that cutting edge of science and how it translates into real practical use cases? What are the biggest surprises that you've come across in your career of how knowledge shifts from the edges to things that may not have that big of importance for humanity, but then over time we kind of figure out what it is? And it seems like a lot of tinkering that's involved to try to same thing with the regolith, trying to like find the little gems inside of there. What have you learned about that in terms of knowledge?
Yeah, I think the early decisions matter. Tinkering's a great word. So, when you make a decision about an approach that you're going to take, um, pursue that as far as you can go until you can prove that it's the wrong decision. But there's going to be a lot of people out there that are going to say, "Why are you doing that? Why don't you do this?" Um, you got to have conviction around that. Some of the decisions matter more than the others. What propellant we're going to use matters because if you change the propellant later, that's a big difference for us. Uh, how we how we get to the moon is we're living in a world where there's half a dozen different companies in the U.S. that are building landers to get to the moon. So how we get there is less important than what we do when we get there. And so we can push that decision off as far as possible. Um, and then what's important to us in our prospecting mission here a few years from now is that we are able to validate the quantity of the helium-3 and our ability to separate out those solar wind gases from the lunar regolith using measuring it using the mass spectrometer. That's what's important about this. Where we go is important because we want to identify a site that we're going to come and harvest in the future. But the exact location isn't as critical as what we do when we get there.
Interesting. And it sounded what I got from that answer about the edge of scientific knowledge is that a lot of it has to do with intuition. And for you personally, how do you know when you're acting from an intuition, or when you've figured out that something's important in the environment to change or to stay with? What's the biggest signs in terms of your life about when you're on the point of intuition?
Yeah, I would say that I have a lot of experience and I have some intuition about problems, but I've also surrounded myself with some of the greatest co-founders around, in addition to Harrison Schmidt, Jack Schmidt, Gary Lai, our CTO, who spent, you know, all of my time at Blue Origin. I was working with Gary Lai, James Antipave, our head of product, Indra Hornsby, our COO, and then the technical team and the science team that we built around us. Uh, we don't we don't even, like, we trust that team, but when we do these design reviews, we take an opportunity to bring outside experts in and really, wire brush, really just critically evaluate what we're doing, and give us feedback on that. And That's input that you take and you decide if you're going to follow that or if you're going to stay on your path. Um, I think that second thing I think is that once you do, keep going, you got to learn from what the hardware tells you along the way.
Mm.
It's going to tell you whether this is going to work or not. So you want to do a lot of testing. I described what we do. Another thing we do I didn't talk about is in addition to testing with lunar regolith, we want to test in lunar gravity. So we
Oh,
fly in an airplane that's operated by Zero Gravity Corporation,
oh,
and they fly parabolas that are shaped to give us 1/6 gravity. And those are important tests for us to test out our hardware. And we can listen to, we can see what we're learning and decide if we need to change something or tinker and tweak and adjust. And having that great team of people that is flexible and not locked into one approach is really important for a startup of our size to move quickly.
that's really cool. Let's go into history. What? Why do you think in 1962, 1963, there's so much optimism, and it all sort of crashed? But I mean, we kept on doing things for a long time. I remember in the 1990s and the early 2000s, like there were still things happening. We didn't get to the moon again. What's your take on the history of space so far, and what we can learn from it?
Yeah, I mean, I was born in 1965. I remember watching some of those Apollo missions, built model rockets as a kid.
Mm.
And There's a lot going on in those times. Like, I was a young kid, but, I've read the history and certainly Apollo 8, the optimism around America, as a power, the ability to do whatever we set ourselves out to do it was validated with the Apollo landings. Apollo 8, though, in 1968, gave us this Earthrise photo, which is sort of first view of Earth from away from the planet, and pretty incredible to see it. I think I've heard that that's credited with starting the Earth Day movement, and some of the early thinking about environmentalism and what do we do to protect this planet. We also, there's a lot going on in America, a lot going on in Vietnam, a lot going on with the economy that caused our the leaders to make the decision to cancel the Apollo program.
Mm.
In maybe the biggest example of been there, done that. We don't need to do this anymore. And what I think was lost is the opportunity to take a system that worked flawlessly for 6 missions, 6 landings on the moon. Um, there were Apollo 13 didn't work. It wasn't flawless, but the 6 landings and returns were successful, and all worked. And we didn't take the opportunity to invest in that system and
Continued.
that industrial, to continuously improve it. And the problem, Stuart, is that we did the same thing on the space shuttle. You know, we
Mm,
built this amazing machine, but we didn't invest in improving it to reduce operating cost, improve turnaround time, improve flight rate, all those things that you could have done that would have resulted in, um, you know, routine access to space. This is the kind of thing that governments have invested in the past, and it's not the private industry that can afford to go do that. But what you're seeing
yeah,
now is a little bit of a shift with
yeah.
private industry stepping in, and it's taken a few decades, but now we see that optimism again. Um, there's so much more in your question that we could go into, but it goes down to some of these decisions that were made that made us not really think about space in the 1972 to
Yeah.
1990s timeframe like we did back in the 60s.
Okay, yeah, that's a really interesting point. It's because I've been studying big science a lot. So the rise of big science with Ernest Rutherford. Ernest Rutherford figured out how to harness the power of the I believe one of the early guys of no he I think he discovered the electron or something like that. But that was one of the series of events that eventually led us to have the Manhattan Project, and you have this giant alliance between research universities and government, and that was really cool. That was first time it had ever happened. I don't think even the UK did that. And now China's doing it. China learned a very good lesson about that. But we kind of lost the lesson. It was really interesting with the 6 landings. That was a knowledge management failure. Well, it was a knowledge management will, collective will, sort of fracturing of the American consciousness. And that led to just lost knowledge. I like to study lost knowledge, particularly during the Dark Ages. This way, just like for some reason, people just stop paying attention to things. And the 6 landings, how to actually bring that knowledge forward. But what I liked what you said about the private industry, because now private industry is coming back, and in that time, as big science has kind of faltered a little bit, private industry has now taken up a lot of that stuff, and you do have people like Microsoft going, and I just was talking to somebody today that they're doing underwater data centers, because the cooling has come back to the cooling again. I've been hearing people talk about space data centers, which would be interesting to talk to you. I'm down here in Argentina, and Argentina actually has an interesting pathway to do space data centers as well. And so it does seem like China has taken the model of big science and they're running with it, and they're doing a pretty good job of it. But I'm pretty optimistic of the United States that our system, with more private interest, I think that our private enterprise is pretty powerful and can sort of take over some of the roles of the government in this future. Anything to respond to on that?
Yeah, I do. I agree. I'm so optimistic about U.S. industry and where we're going, and the decisions that are ahead of us. The point about the private industry, I think, is like, why did private industry step into this? Well,
Mm.
number one, there's 2 individuals who are well known that had the resources to start rocket companies. In one case, Jeff Bezos was inspired by the moon landings as a child and wanted to participate and do something like that, and certainly he has in a big way. Elon Musk, on the other hand, was wanting to send something to Mars, and found that NASA had no plans to go to Mars. So his dissatisfaction, combined with his ability to bootstrap jumpstart SpaceX at the time, led to what we have today, which is, without argument, the most successful and high performing space company in history. The the complexity of what we did on Apollo was the result of not just money, but a very high functioning industrial base.
Mm.
And that industrial
Yeah.
base is, for the most part, gone away. A lot of those companies have combined. Many of the companies don't exist at all today. Many of those companies haven't built the kind of equipment of the size and complexity that was required during Apollo. So We're just now with Artemis using that to recreate the industrial base. And I think that's an important point I want to take across is when you have 0 companies with lunar landers 5, 6 years ago, and now you have 6 in the U.S. That's a big deal. That's a big step forward, and that's where my optimism about what Interlune is going to be doing in the 5 to 10 year, coming forward. That's why I believe so strongly in our mission.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. How can our listeners find out anything going on in the next few months in terms of Interlune that you want to share?
Well, follow us on at Interlune on LinkedIn, on X, on Instagram, and you can also connect with me on LinkedIn. And I look forward to hearing from your listeners, and appreciate you taking me on the show.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you, Stewart.